It's been said that in military terms, it's never advisable to fight a battle on two fronts. That, for example, if Hitler had not insisted on attacking the entire world while going after Russia, that the German army might have won. And in the invention of the Greek tragedies, a wonderful method of dealing with trauma indirectly through the arts, they were fighting a battle on seven fronts for quite some time. And I've alluded in these videos, to sleeplessness, compulsion, addiction, overwhelming emotion. And what I want to talk about is the load that I experience. It's definitely too heavy for my psyche. It's bigger than I know how to deal with. And I don't know what to do with the weight. That's why I asked for help. But I want to share and communicate what that load is as I experience it. And, just how heavy it is for one person to carry alone. The first and a very, very big part of the load is the shame dump. The position that Jason Weston and the High facilitators took, building on Peter Sandhill's position, which began with the first active shame dump, when Peter Sandhill said, you need to do your own work, refused to apologize for anything, refused to acknowledge or own anything, and talked about how one-sided the relationship was, etc. As i.e. he was the victim in this, and this after being strung along, etc. And he started adding in this statement, which he's made 4 times. He said, "I'm really clear. This has nothing to do with me." Which is a strange comment, since every knowledgeable psychotherapist, trauma therapist that I can possibly talk with, or any book I read, indicates that it has everything to do with Peter Sandhill. That none of this would have happened had Peter Sandhill honored his high agreements, had he honored a healthy marriage container, had he studied marriage and family therapy prior to doing relationship therapy, had he asked a question, done any kind of questionnaire prior to, in effect, inviting a romantic relationship with a heterosexual, highly traumatized young man in 1993, that this would not have happened. And it would not have happened twice, nor would it have happened if Peter had listened to me. I mean, can you imagine the gift in this context in which the Human Awareness Institute may not exist if this protocol is kept up, because it should not exist at the expense of its clients, at the expense of the people it's intended to serve. And when I invited Peter and requested and pleaded with him to take money out of the relationship after it was not a professional relationship. It's not a professional relationship when your therapist is asking you to lay on top of them and kiss you passionately while on psychedelics. And heaven help, in 1993, when Peter Sandhill wanted to take MDMA, and he recommended it without asking any questions. It's just this bizarre abuse of leadership. heaven help us if we had been taking it together. If this is how he behaves when I'm on it, I don't normally behave this way, but if I've been pushed into a high dose of more than I'm comfortable with for my first experience with psilocybin, and then been encouraged to take MDMA on top of it, yes, I behave this way in this experience. That's what a sitter is there for. But in Peter Sandhill's shame dump, this has absolutely nothing to do with him. And he's subsequently, under threat of lawsuit, given a magnificent apology. But it is shaming to have to threaten someone with a lawsuit to get an apology. That is an incredible message that you don't matter. And when that comes from someone you've fallen in love with more than you've ever fallen in love with a human being, and have had to pay $175 an hour to be on, it is an incredible fucked up shame dump. And the high facilitators flatly do not want to own it. Peter, with his 4 statements, this has nothing to do with me, even after his apology. I mean, what do you do? And then no refund? I mean, this is a joke. So there is an incredible amount of shame dump, and knowledgeable therapists immediately track in and zoom in on that. If any of you are familiar with Brené Brown, John Bradshaw, you understand this is shaming, particularly with the way that we define masculinity in America as a man being in control. And you induce a man into shame and take him out of control. I have been out of control of my body since this erupted, and I have been shamed for that. And I have the thousands of voices of an entire lifetime inside my head, shaming myself for being out of control. Now, this kind of pressure cooker, because one of the insights that shame research has led to is that if you do not give the shame back to the abuser, you will pass it on. By extension, Peter Sandhill, the high facilitators, have shame to give back to their abusers, or they would not be dumping it on their therapeutic patients, on their clients. They would not be. You see, because shame it's a social phenomena. It's the phenomena that you have transgressed something, so you're out on your own. You're beyond the pale. You're not included. Well, this began as soon as I asked for help, didn't receive it, and was excluded. I was the only party excluded from the meeting called to respond to this. Can you imagine that? Please help me, I can't drive. Okay, stand by. As soon as it's convenient for us, we will have a private meeting. You won't be invited, of course. And then out of this will come this statement that this is not a high issue. So there's an enormous amount of shame being dumped, and it is significantly more impactful when you have a group ganging up on you, number one. It is significantly more impactful when these are your role models, number two. It is significantly more impactful when these are your community leaders. And what they're undermining is the safety of your ability to engage with your support structure, because this represents 4 of my support people, the people I have paid money to advocate for my well-being, who are putting their own well-being before mine. A pattern that is only too familiar from childhood and governmental interactions. The power structure comes first. The client, the citizen, the child is sacrificed to maintain the face of the power structure. And then it has to be lied about to maintain the face of the power structure. This is a shame dump. It has been almost impossible. What do you do when your abuser just refuses to even read your emails? This is the position of the high facilitator. We're not even going to read. This isn't it. This is not. It's a complete whitewash of the entire phenomena, which some part of me, see, this is why this is such a criminal violation. See, this is why there are rules and rights around how a therapist interacts with the patient. Because when a therapist, like a parent, has touched the most vulnerable parts and the need for belonging has been hooked into that therapeutic relationship by going into that vulnerable terrain, you cannot unhook it at will, because you are unhooking a primary need that is not met anywhere else. It's like trying, it's very similar to saying, okay, we're going to go down into deep water, and I have a sacred trust, and you're going to have my oxygen anytime you need it, because I'm here to keep you safe. And so you go down into that deep water, into the deeps, and they rip out your oxygen. And you reach for it, please, I need some. And they say no. And they unhook you and go up. And you manage to get to the top. You are in terror. You're in grief. Your body is in shock. It's a miracle you're even up there. And then it's like, no, this isn't our stuff. This is profound psychological abuse. And in that situation, I watched myself become more abusive to the people around me, which means that I then feel ashamed. So first I've been shamed. When that is not owned and cleaned up, it goes back. Then I feel ashamed of my own behavior, which I don't have to deal with normally. Normally, I'm proud of my behavior, but not in these last 2 years. So this is a double wave, and we're just dealing with item number 1. Item number 2, I feel in a continual battle with our culture in the deeply levels of ingrained male chauvinism. It goes far deeper than just women are less than men, the whole, and racism is part of that, etc. Because in male chauvinism, as it's expressed in the West, it is the lineal left brain and articulating talent, which I happen to have, thank heavens, which I happen to have strongly, is elevated within the culture to this godlike status. It is absurd. And and the inverse is that sentimentality, emotional spontaneity, diffuse responsiveness, everything feminine is devalued. And so one of the big battles that I feel that I'm in is it's as if my car has been smashed over with a baseball bat. Every tire has been slashed, and I'm in shock and I can't drive. Now, if this had been done on video, just a fucking car, the outrage that a Human Awareness Institute facilitator had gone over and smashed up someone's car would be palpable. But in a male chauvinistic culture, smashing up someone's heart, someone's emotions, someone's self-esteem, someone's sanity is like, well, I guess you could see it from a number of different ways. And this ties into, male chauvinism is so deep in our culture, we don't get any emotional literacy. It's a minority of you. I'm talking and speaking to an audience that is emotionally illiterate as a matter of principle. Feelings don't matter. You may get 4 years to learn how to fly a plane. You don't get an hour to learn how to navigate emotions. It's just not important. This is the cause of an enormous amount of suffering in our culture that I've been dealing with since birth. Every time, this and that trauma happens, etc. It's absolutely horrific. But it means that we're not playing on a level playing field. You've heard this little whim, I've heard this little whim, you've read this book, there is not a clear consensus in a male chauvinistic culture about even what's happening, let alone how it affects, how the heart, mind, body intersect. And I feel like I'm left fighting just like it's up to me to prove that emotions matter, that emotions can kill you if they're not regulated in an appropriate way, and that anyone should respond. And that is coming at me from the entire community, first by Peter Sandhill, then by the facilitators, then the entire community's failure to respond to clear requests. I need help. I mean, the room of love? Would we sit and watch someone drown in a lake and say this was... No, because we're physically oriented. But emotionally drown, I don't want to deal with it. That's just feelings. They'll get over it, right? That's a lot to carry. 3, incompetent therapy. I feel like the high facilitators have behaved in a way that suggests they are so uneducated. And it turns out, I learned in the middle of this, they're not licensed. And here's the frustration around that I've carried. I have spent more than 50 hours trying to coach the high facilitators on how to be ethical, professional, and to show up for me with collapse and neglect every step of the way. It starts with, please, can you hold and listen to me? No, none of us are going to do it. Then I have to play the 10-hour tape of Peter doing this because nobody believes me. They don't come over. I have to start working. Then I have to convince them that it's a big deal. It's like, isn't not being able to drive, isn't almost getting in a car accident enough? No, not for these people. It's not. So I have to convince them, but it's not working. Then I have to threaten them with a lawsuit. I've never done that in my entire life, which again, I feel like I don't want to be this person. And yet my survival seems to depend on it. And then everything that I do that's out of character, the facilitators are quick to zoom in on that and bring that to my attention and put that towards me as if that's the real me, which furthers the shame dump. This isn't the real me. This is who I become when I'm completely betrayed and abandoned by my therapist in a psychedelic session and lied to and shamed and charged for it. This is who I become. It's who a great deal. I am absolutely convinced that if you took 100 young men, 100 young sexual, 100 young heterosexual men, and put them through the 15-year protocol by Peter Sandhill, that some of them would be dead. Most of them would have sued high. Some of them would be in deep depression and shame. Some of them, would have committed suicide. Some of them would be hurting other people and not knowing why. And none of them would be healthy. And the first step of health is to start distancing that this is not the room of love. This is not healthy. This is abuse, which I've got to fight every one of my therapists, 4 of them, Barbara Musser, Sarah Sandhill, Peter Sandhill, and Ann Watts. Ann was my therapist and support person for 5 relationships with high people. One of the things that is pointed out in the book, The Black Swan, where they did a lot of research on experts, is, among other things, finding out that an enormous amount of experts are completely wrong most of the time whenever they went to the leading experts and stuff. But they also discovered that the skill needing to know if you were an expert in something was the same skill as being an expert, which means that most people are not experts. but they don't know enough to know that they're not, because the same skill it would take to accurately assess if they're an expert is the skill necessary to be an expert. And everyone forms an opinion whether they're an expert or not. And so I've felt pity and grief and divided because I think the high facilitators at some level want to do a good job, or, they didn't come in here for the money. It's not top line money work for most therapists, etc. So they meant well coming into this. And that part of me feels for them. And yet I have exhausted myself trying to teach them what healthy therapy looks like, since they don't have the training and licensing. And they punish me for this, which leaves me deeply alarmed for everyone else. But it is a load that I have asked them repeatedly to hire a competent trauma therapist to help them so that it's not left on me. And eventually I just pushed them away because I was getting so sick, repeating myself. And again, and every little bit was resentfully resisted. It's like, no, we don't have time for this. No, that's not right. This isn't our stuff. You shouldn't have to do. Every step of defense that was possible was there. Even to the format. I got exhausted, so I started sending audio recordings to Peter Sandhill, etc. That's resisted. It's like, Dane, I don't like listening to all these long recordings. Could you type them out? Let's just, let's not take any responsibility. Let's pretend that we're being noble and doing you this great favor. And if we could just get you to totally collapse, that would be ideal. Every little thing was this kind of push. No, wow, thank you so much for coming to us. We're really interested in getting to the bottom of this. We're going to go. None of that. 3, trauma. I had to deal with being traumatized by my support team without even knowing what trauma was, because the high curriculum appears to consist of doing indefinite amounts of work with up to 4 facilitators and doing 30 workshops without trauma even being mentioned, let alone identified, diagnosed, and responded to. This is an incredible amount of professional negligence and ignorance. Because if Anne had known anything about trauma and stuff, the 5 high people I brought to Anne in couples therapy would have been trauma. But she didn't even know enough to know that she didn't know. So there was no referral to a competent professional. And when all this is covered with the word love, who doesn't want to be loved? But do you want to be operated on by a brain surgeon who doesn't even know what a brain is, and just have it be fine when it fucks up and fucks up and fucks up because it's called love? It's not love, it's incompetence. The trauma of the gay issue, it's a big deal for any Western man. Any Western man has convoluted feelings and stuff, and normally a therapist is there to help them navigate. How do I feel about men? How do I feel about the culture? It is a 1 to 2 year thing of discovery and blah, 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 blah. Not for me. On my very first session with Peter Sandhill, I'm scouting out as a trauma survivor. You learn to scout out everything that's going on, what's going on, etc. I noticed a huge bulge in his white sweatpants. What's that? It's an erection. Why? I'm attracted to you. I'm already over my head. My therapist is thrusting me into the gay thing. And then as I try and, so we have gay stuff coming up. We have deep betrayal, if you've followed along any of these stories you will see betrayal after betrayal after betrayal. We have lies at my expense with no formal help to deal with that trauma. I learn about it midway, and the more I read, the more alarmed I become, because it helps me make sense of those times when I walked out of Anne's office feeling worse, when I walked out of Peter's office feeling worse, paying to feel worse. And when you don't know what's going on, the default child contract in an authority type relationship is to blame oneself, which Peter Sandhill is only too happy to facilitate. It's nothing about me. It's all you. It's all you. Blamed and excluded. Being blamed and being excluded from every single meeting, from the very idea that this is a high issue, is an enormous weight. For one thing, it means that every conversation with anyone in the Human Awareness Institute community is a big deal. Why? Because the high facilitators have blocked every one of my requests to make it public, to make a public apology. Which means that I am the bearer of traumatic news when I need support for the same news. But the person hearing it cannot support me because they're in coping mechanism for the fact that their community leaders have betrayed them. That's a lot of weight to carry. Loss of support right when I need it most. When you go into trauma, when you have deep grief, when you go into deep emotions more than you've ever felt, you reach for your therapist, you reach for your community, you reach for your support team. That was high. Right when I needed it most, every single facilitator revealed a capacity to betray me and be unsafe for me, while putting me in this situation of either upsetting other high people and being either attacked or run from, etc., in their trauma around the issue, which meant that I lost complete support overnight. A very big part of psychedelics are melting boundaries. It would have been very, very good for me to go gently into this because, as I say, I was trauma illiterate after working in 30 workshops and one-on-one with 4 facilitators. Trauma illiterate. That is a red flag right there. But nonetheless, I was. When you break down boundaries with a chemical that you have partitioned as a survival strategy in consciousness, you are faced with emotions that your brain did not consider it safe to feel. So I'm dealing with a rush-in of emotion from the childhood trauma that largely mimics what the high facilitators have done. And the dissociative protection, meaning the emotional numbness that of those compartmentalized feelings, are coming in on me at the same time I'm dealing with the betrayal within the community and within the high facilitator body. Loss of the dissociative protection of the trauma mechanism by psilocybin, a boundary dissolving thing. It is an absolutely profound growth leap forward when you have the support to integrate the traumatic memories. I had no support. I had a man self-centeredly looking after himself and putting his fears and his own panics and ignorances above my safety from the get-go. Deepening childhood abuse. When you run the new abuse right down the line of the childhood abuse pattern, it opens those old wounds again, and it goes much deeper than if it's a completely new pattern of abuse. It just so happens that the facilitator protocol of taking 0 childhood history, no questionnaire that would easily bring this up, and refusing to hear how much this was hurting, refusing to respond, was the exact reenactment of the childhood wound. So I'm dealing with losing my protection of numbness of those childhood wounds, and at the same time having them reenacted by my support team in the same confused, fucked up name of love that my parents used, it produces enormous insanity. Because as with a parent, you need to believe that these people know what they're doing so that you feel safe. But if you believe they know what they're doing, you're going to do what they say, and everything they say to do is taking you into a deep pit that is damaging your safety. It is a terrible, divisive crisis to be in on the inside. At the same time that it became clear to me how much I had been abused because the emotional ice pack was off thanks to the massive first psychedelic dose at Peter Sandhill's insistence. Can you imagine a doctor insisting that you take 3 times the medicine that you're comfortable with? I mean, like, just triple the... It's like, what's the hurry? There was none on my side. But Peter argued with me for 5 fucking minutes. And of course, it's always done for my benefit, right? I want you to get your money's worth. I want you to get your money's worth. No, that's too much. I want you to get your money. It's like, give me a break. Seeing my own abuse. We don't have compartmentalized eyes. At the very same moment that I had to acknowledge that Peter Sandhill was abusing me for all kinds of reasons I couldn't begin to figure out, was abusing me, and was placing his own ego crap above my safety. At the very same time I read the book and learned how I was being traumatized by the high facilitators, I had to mentally acknowledge how much trauma I had gone through as a child. But I had to do one more thing that was equally sad and painful. I had to see how I hurt and traumatize other people, starting with my siblings. And the amount of grief that I have for the ways that I've hurt people is immense. And I have that whole load of grief sitting on my shoulders when I'm carrying this enormous cup, the shame of the high facilitators, the battle, I haven't, because this is happening in a very delicate context. I have health issues. Chronic fatigue. My legs have been going numb the last 10 years. It's harder and harder to find energy to do things. And this stuff is cutting my energy in half again. 30% of my optimal capacity. And this is taking a huge hit, but it's taking a hit of a very, it's kind of as if your savings have been wiped out 80% by, a tragedy, and then something comes in and takes another half of that. So it's in a context of health crisis and chronic fatigue. It's in the context of being in the 10 to 20% of the population that is HSP. Look at Elaine Aron's work. That's why I've talked about it on the site. It's much more intense to be going through this as an HSP as opposed to as a neurotypical. It's in a context of undiagnosed PTSD, which means all of this is, I'm learning about PTSD as this all is happening, which is adding to the sense of betrayal, because I thought this community was committed to a world in which everyone wins. I thought they knew enough about healthy relationships so that if something was off, they would tell me. But they didn't tell me about their own crap, and they didn't tell me about my crap. Both. I mean, blind spots work both ways, is what I'm saying. So in order to see Peter Sandhill's abuse of me, I have to see my own abuse of other people. And the abuse of my parents. It's all happening on that wavelength that's been blocked out to protect the abuser, to protect the culture. It's in a taboo area. Inability to work. I have lost 2 jobs. I turned down one job with a difficult client because I could not deal with it. That was, $150,000 right there. And then I got negative reviews from 2 clients because I am in no way present in optimal coping mechanism, and I know it. And it's like, how can I get through the day? And I have 2 hours of maybe functional energy a day, and it doesn't always come when I want it to, if you've noticed the sleep thing. So I have to schedule these appointments, and clients like, why can't I meet you in the morning? It's like, do I tell them I'm being, terrorized by my therapist and this and that and the other, and I just can't cope? And then in American culture, they call that unprofessional. So what do I do? I don't know. It's happening in a context of inability of work. It's happening in a context of deteriorating social skills, because the coping mechanism that a child develops to deal with these things are never optimal. Addiction, compulsion, this and that and the other, they're never optimal. One of my biggest ones is control. And the absolute terror I feel when I'm out of control. When I feel absolutely terrified, I become hypercritical. You may have noticed. Hypercritical. The more hypercritical I am, the more upset other people get. The more upset other people feel, the more terrified I am. And the more hypercritical. So it just goes round and round in this vicious circle. And I see my part in it, and I feel ashamed. And I can't do anything about it, which brings up helplessness, which is another shame factor. Men are supposed to be in control and powerful. I feel completely helpless. So it's another part of the shame loop. Confusing feelings. In my psychedelic experience, I experienced more love and joy and peace and all that than I've ever felt in my life. Unfortunately, I felt those strongly attached and associated to Peter Sandhill, who then proceeded to treat me worse than almost any lover has ever treated me, and charged me for it. I don't know how he manages to sleep at night, frankly, with the tree. Anyway, that's Peter Sandhill, which then brings in more hate, more grief. So there's this spread of emotions that has never been so wide. Extreme love and bliss, extreme hate, extreme despair, extreme hope. It's scattered all over the map. It hasn't integrated me, it's disintegrated me in a very confusing way. So this is happening in that context. It's happening in a context of relative emotional illiteracy. How many hours did you receive in high school, college, teaching you how to deal with jealousy, how to deal with rage, how to deal with this, how to regulate hate? What creates hate? I mean, hate, if we understand chemistry, like I've been paying a lot of attention because I've had to learn. Hate is a mixture of helplessness, profound hurt, and other people who are unwilling to help and who add to the hurt. That produces hate. I am in that state. Helplessness to change a number of things that are just, there are forces going on in my psyche that are too big for me to balance. And I don't even fully understand all of them, but they're too big for me, and I feel helpless. And every time I feel helpless, I feel rage. Every time I feel rage, I feel hate that I'm stuck in this position because I have cowards for a support team. I feel rage. And then I feel fear for telling the truth because they have shown a merciless degree of willingness to attack me. Peter Sandhill, in our first call, when I've asked for help, haven't gotten it. Facilitators are, stonewalling me. And in Peter's first call, he says, I'm never going to trust you again. Why? Because I told his peers what he did Can you imagine what's so fucked up in a therapist that he would feel betrayed by his peers and his wife knowing, nothing made up, what he did? And that this was only necessary after 6 months of stonewalling and obstruction of every path that would help my well-being, having trusted Peter's promise that he would be there like me. He said a Gandalf-like stand, at the Balrog, you shall not pass. I'm going to take that kind of stand for you, he said, before insisting that I take an overdose, before glossing over everything about him that was fucked up in the entire session and not even showing up for the first support session on time. And refusing everything healthy that I asked for. This is his idea of, that kind of, and then he wants credit for that. He wants credit. I did this, I did that, I did this. He needs that credit for what a great therapist he is. And he'll tell you, he's a great trauma therapist. So great, he never even mentioned the word in any of our work. I feel like I'm having to learn about feelings as I'm dealing with overwhelming feelings. And then that when I talk about overwhelming feelings, no one in the United States that I've talked to has a healthy, competent response to these feelings. No one. I went to my other shaman who I've paid $100,000. I said, I'm freaking out, da-da-da-da-da-da. I said, please help me. He said, this is terrible, blah, 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 blah. I said, I know, and I don't think they get it. I don't think they get it. Please write them a letter. He refused. He said, I'm scared of people like that. He, the shaman, healer, blah, 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 is scared of the high facilitator, scared of being involved with a lawsuit, scared. He's scared. And he does nothing to secure me any support or anything like that. And then I start having a wave of betrayal with him at the same time. Misunderstood and alone. One of the unfortunate aspects of going my own way since I was 14-year-old, leaving school, doing my own self-designed homeschooling program, running my business in my own way, starting my own business, never working for it, I have a very different context for reality than most anyone I meet. And people tell me that. Never met anyone like you, never met anyone like you. And those are the people that take the time to know. The people who don't take the time to know me constantly project whatever it is that they think is everyone else. I'm constantly being told guys are like this. I look at it and I think, have I ever behaved that way? No. But it doesn't matter because guys are like this and you're a guy. So it's maddening to know that a majority not only won't take the time to understand, but they will assume that they do understand without taking the time and will slather their projections and judgments based on those projections onto me before taking the time to learn anything. This has been my reality my entire life. And it's deeper in this context because this is a thing that I could not put into words accurately in less than 100 hours. What does this culture give me? 140 characters. Anything like that isn't cool. So it's a self-referencing system. It's self-limiting. This doesn't fit into 140 characters. Well, then it's no good. Well, it is good, it just doesn't fit. No, anything that doesn't fit isn't good. Get to the nugget, get to the nugget. So it's this crazy-making dynamic that's designed to filter out complexity and intensity because this culture doesn't like complexity and intensity in an emotional terrain. Caring more than I feel cared for. as I weigh all of this stuff, I've thought about the other patients at High. How are they going to deal with this? What's good for them? What's good for America? Can this be salvaged in some way? And I feel alone, caring about the facilitators, about High, about the community, and I do not feel that caring is reciprocated, which leaves me feeling alone. There is one thing that I have needed in this entire process. I have needed someone to listen to me with deep empathy, feeling what it's like to share the emotions and to show up, wanting to be there on a regular basis without a flaky factor. That is what I have needed to gather through this. And there is one woman in the community. I asked every single person in every workshop that I've ever been in to help with that. And I asked every team member and I asked every facilitator. There is one woman who gave me that for a while. And she couldn't keep the agreement. She couldn't keep the agreement. And she had to shame me for not being able to keep the agreement, just like Peter Sandhill. She had to say that the reason she was breaking her agreement, she phrased it like this. She said, "I'm sorry that your needs make it impossible for me to meet them." And that wasn't the issue. We had an agreement that to end the container, she had to give one visit's notice. That's it. It was the only agreement. She could end it in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. It doesn't matter. You need to give me several days' notice so that I don't feel the reenactment of the abandonment. She didn't do it twice. The first time I preempted it because I hadn't heard from her, and I called her and she was out of state or out of, way out of, and she'd forgotten. And the second time was on the same day. No apology, because she couldn't admit. She couldn't admit and own that she was directly and clearly violating our agreement. And she's the only one who helped, and she helped more than any other facilitator helped in this process. Even with that betrayal, I cannot deal with her ever again in this terrain, though. She is not safe for me in this terrain. I'm in this terrain. She's not safe for me. It's heartbreaking. She has a lot of trauma to deal with. And the High facilitators and the High community have not helped her any more than they've helped me in this terrain. So it's in the nature of people with unresolved trauma to hurt other people like this. It's guaranteed. It's not a world where everyone wins. It's a world where everyone loses. It is a world of ignorance and fear. Grief at lost opportunity. As I reviewed the 30 lovers that have been part of my High community experience since 1993, all but one or two have had elements of trauma, and about half of them have had significant elements of trauma, meaning that trauma was the biggest disruptive factor, either in me, them, or both. Very often it was both. And not one of those relationships had a vocabulary to deal with it, including 5 in which I went to Ann Watts. There was never the awareness, oh, you're dealing with trauma, that means this, this, and this, and this. And if you don't know what it means, don't think you do. You won't begin to get a clue until you read The Body Keeps the Score. I did $150,000 of therapy, clueless about trauma. Clueless. It's a biological mechanism and regular therapy can damage you if you've got trauma, and it has. So this is the context in which we're shame dumping, dealing with incompetent therapy, dealing with trauma, being blamed, excluded, etc., deepening childhood abuse. Seeing my own abuse, one of the most painful elements is realizing that if I had known about trauma, if I had known about trauma, if I had known how to treat trauma, if I had had the vocabulary, the amount of hurt that I would have caused other people might have gone down 80%. And that based on the fact that I bought a trauma book and began doing the exercises, within 10 minutes of hearing the word in a cafe, a young man, no therapist, in a cafe, and I had the book purchased in 10 minutes and listened to that afternoon along with exercises, and that helped enormously in dealing with the abuse of the facilitators and ultimately seeing how it was unhealthy for me to stay depending and being betrayed. Not a single facilitator, Anne kept her promise. She broke fidelity and confidentiality once. She hurt me on a number of occasions, but she did not break an agreement. The only people that consented to have anything to do with it out of the goodness of their hearts, Peter Sandhill and Jason Weston both broke agreements repeatedly. And, get around to an apology. It doesn't repair the impact. You drop a baby on the asphalt and then 30 minutes later I'm sorry, and you pick it up and you drop it again on the asphalt. Oh, I'm sorry, doesn't deal with the blood. Doesn't deal with the concussion. It's just, I'm not safe with these people. Loneliness is immense, which is sad because it's one of the most painful elements of my childhood. Being completely alone as the power structures around me needed to feign superiority and perfection, which meant that none of my pain could exist. Because for it to exist, it would have to have a cause. And if it had to exist, it was always my fault. This is profound betrayal and loneliness. When you hit someone and you can't own that you hit them, but they're still crying, they've still got the welt on them. So then you've got to shame them, make it about them. What's wrong with you that you're demonstrating symptoms of abuse? This is the classic pattern of dumping the shame on the child. And it happened again. Anne was kind enough to acknowledge it in one occasion, but not willing to do what it took to prioritize her client first. High always came first with Anne, which is paradoxical because high is about into me you see, not secrets. High is about loving, not abuse. So it's really protecting her. The secrets of high have always been more important to Anne than my safety. My safety has been important, but not more important than protecting the power structure and the secrecy within high. Addiction is a coping mechanism. When this amount of load gets thrust on the psyche, it is terrifyingly overwhelming. I need something to distract myself from an overwhelming thing I don't know how to cope with. So I have addicted to food, I have addicted to control, I have addicted to sleep, I have addicted to smoking tobacco in excessive quantities for the first time in my life. I have looked and I have addicted to criticism, just ranting and raving about things. These are all addictions that distract me from an incredible amount of pain. This has resulted in a deep inner split. There was a time when the most important thing in my world was to support high. I've donated money, I've filled 150 workshops, I've credited them in books, I've learned everything, I did repeats, I took 30 workshops, I work with 4 facilitators, I've recommended numerous people, my family has done high. And now I'm placed in the position, due to the incompetence of leadership, between appearing like an enemy, and this is absolutely heartbreaking, because a trauma and an abuse survivor, a abused by any power structure is never the enemy for coming forward. They are the ally. The danger in the power structure is the abuse itself and the secrecy around it. That will destroy the power structure. Meaning, if Jason had said, Dane, thanks for bringing this to our attention. What do you need to be safe? Let's refer you to a competent trauma therapist. We're very, very sorry for all our role in this. We all recommended Peter. We've clearly got blind spots. We're going to learn. We'd like to welcome you as our teacher to show us how to grow here. And we'd like to give you any support we can. This would have been a transcendent ritual of healing the childhood wound, because it would have meant that this time the child comes before the parent looking good. But no, this is not even a high issue. And we're not going to give you any support, because then it would have to be a high issue. And we're going to do it behind closed doors. We're going to exclude you. And it's done in the exact opposite tone. This isn't a high issue, but we like you. So we're going to do stuff in a way that is not what you asked for, is not what you need. We're going to ignore the fact that it's not working for you. But out of the goodness of our hearts, Anne's going to talk with you. Felicia's going to donate a whole hour, in which hour she facilitated Peter's rage and his terror, dumped at a regressed 5-year-old before getting any support, out of the goodness of her heart. Now we're gonna do all of this smoke and mirrors to pretend it's not a Harry. Because what if I got sued? What if this got out? What if people realized we don't know what we're doing? No, we've got to shut Dane down. We've got to shut his truth down so that we look good. This is the core corruption of every Western power structure for the last 2,000 years. Doesn't matter where you look, the CIA, the government, it's horrific, and the toll is very high. It rots out the core values to protect the abuse cycle and the abuser, not to protect the organization. The organization thrives, and I pleaded with Jason, please come out ahead of this. Please be the first one to announce this so that you look better. You think you're going to look good in court with me talking about how you've disconnected my email account so I can't tell anyone, how you won't even, you think that's going to look good for your organization? No, you're killing it. You are killing the essence of high, and you think you're defending it because you're so incompetent you don't know what leadership is. And you don't know that you don't know. Because back to the black swan, the only people who know that this is incompetent are the people that are competent. And believe me, when I say that licensed experts in the field call this a travesty of abuse and will testify about that in court. And it is very sad for me to be this great supporter, meeting with Jason and Marcy at my house to donate real estate tips just months before to save high money. That's the only time I've been able to interact with a high facilitator that I have not been charged for it. Donating another thing to high. It's a deep inner split. Am I crazy? Was I a fool to deal with these people? I don't want them to get hurt. I don't think it's right that this is happening. How can they do this? They probably mean well. It's a complete inner split which weakens me and paralyzes parts of me. When I need dynamic sense of control, you need a sense of empowerment to get over trauma. Trauma is a sense that your life is in danger, which is my feeling around this, because it has laid me up on my back at times, and I've burned through all my savings in a culture that is all about money. I'm treated like a king if I have money. I'm treated like nothing without it. That is a traumatic experience. Another load that I carry is, I try and resolve the split, as I say, move on, let go, do this, do that, soothe them. It's a complete split. And this is the opposite of healing. Healing is to integrate the self and make it strong. Abuse splits the self. It's telling the 6-year-old boy, don't tell mom I've had an affair because it would ruin our marriage. You've just split that boy in half. There's no way. There's no way that boy can be whole for the rest of that relationship. He's complicit with the abuse now. If he tells, he's got dad's hatred and, betrayal and all that laced at him. If he doesn't tell, then he's a betrayer of mom. It's teaching him how to be chauvinistic and abuse women. It's betraying it's the man who tells his son a secret that breaks the marriage has split that boy. And that's what Peter Sandhill has done by refusing to go out in public and own this as his thing. He's putting me, and he will blame me to the last, responsible. If High breaks up, it won't be Peter Sandhill's fault. No, he will have been doing everything he possibly can to make things worse, but pretending it isn't. And, it's, I love this man. That's where they come back to. My father died. This is the reenactment of the wound. Of course, Peter Sandhill doesn't bother to learn, which is why he makes the same mistake over and over again. My father just died. And his response to my talking to him about a lifetime of abuse was not to acknowledge a single thing. And he said, I've loved you unconditionally, not just conditionally. That would have been mere humans, mere mortals love conditionally. No, Dad loved unconditionally. And not just from time to time. He loved from the moment of birth, which means that every bit of that abuse for the entire lifetime, really, although I'm too dumb to realize it, was unconditional love. Thanks, Dad. Thanks, Peter. It's good to know that love can tear you apart like this. This isn't love. This is fucked up abuse, and this is why we're in a culture that when you say, I love you, people paralyze. They get terrified because it's not love. They know that we're in deep waters here, and it's got a majority slant of going horribly when someone brings in that word because it's used to cover up abuse. We love you, meaning, please don't tell us about our shadow. We don't want to deal with it. Please go insane so that we don't have to own that there's anything at all remotely difficult about us. Please do that, and we'll just call it love, and we'll all be happy. This is insanity. It's abuse, and it creates the most profound mix-up. Because unless that insanity gets unraveled, then you internalize the abuse and you go and love someone else, quote unquote, meaning you abuse them the way you were abused. And when they don't like it, you think back, well, what happened to me when people do? Oh yeah, no. I don't know why you don't like this, but this is love. This is unconditional love. Bullshit. So I've got to deal with this with the dad dying and doing this while Peter's doing it, having, made this pledge to, take this stand for me. And it's just one more letdown. In that split, as I try and resolve it this way and this way, one of the things I do repeatedly is, quote, try to move on. And I get a few hours grace, and it's absolutely wonderful. And I start into some ambitious project and and do this. And I'm headlong in my normal enthusiasm for creatively doing something. I've done thousands of goals in my life. Built my first house when I was 23. I'm very competent in that area. And so I think, let's focus on the positive, blah, 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 blah. I start moving into that terrain, and I get swept with despair. I get washed by a tidal wave of rage and grief. And I realize this is not going to let me go. I feel more powerless trying to move on than I do dealing with this head on. Why? because every time I try to move on, I get whacked hard and I feel like a fool. More shame, going back to item number 1. I feel like a fool. I feel powerless because it tells me I can't do what I want to do. I feel another level of rage and hate because none of this was a problem before Peter Sandhill was so loving and before the high facilitators were so loving about Peter Sandhill's love. It was not a problem. I never had this issue, which means it's tied in to all the things that they're absolutely committed to denying, to the extent of disconnecting my email account so that I can't tell anyone. This is maddening. Do I want to be betrayed and lied to one more time? No. Do I want to try and move on and feel this big weight knocking me back every time because I'm divided? No. What do? I feel impotent, frustrated, and helpless. I flail around. In my flailing around, I'm impatient, irritable, critical, hostile. And who gets that? The people around me, not the high facilitators. They're cowing away, pretending that they love me in this little umbrella somewhere else, as if it's not even happening. I don't know how they're going to deal with court, because that's, after doing business, millions of dollars years. I started this business at 17. I have never been sued, and I have never sued anyone. And and all but 3 or 4 clients, there wasn't even an issue. And in those issues, there was never an issue about lying or breaking stuff. There's just, sometimes people expected this. I didn't do a good enough job communicating, or more often they rushed off and kept stalling me when I tried to tell them what was going on. Just do what you think best. We trust you. And then they come back and they say, that's not what we want. Well, it's like, duh, it's like you wouldn't talk to me. So, I'm in this bizarre thing where I may sue these people, because the last bit that I feel is a load is people have told me all my life that I can articulate things that they feel, that they know, but that they can't articulate. And that they learn things from me as a result that they have not learned from anyone else. Number 1, people have told me I care more, I'm more, sensitive, etc., than other people. I am absolutely clear that the facilitator protocol towards me has not been personal. Yes, I'm perfectly aware that there's a projection and an image of me, and that is affecting their emotions. But in the discipline of a professional relationship, a surgeon doesn't cut off your arm if he doesn't like you and sew you up if he doesn't. There's personal issues, this and that and the other, but they do the protocol that they feel is appropriate if they have the training. And I cannot trust these people to behave better than they've behaved with me, with someone else they abuse at some point in the future. Nor can I trust these people to change. Like, if Peter Sandhill in 1993 had suggested doing drugs together, talked about his sexual attraction, brought me into his marriages, made me a secret keeper, freaked me out of my mind, and then had apologized, I would think there was a chance to change. He never apologized once. He diffused it and blocked it to such a degree that it didn't come up until I was high. It was the first thing out of my mouth. Then he diffused it again and covered it up. And so he is 100% committed to blocking out everything dark inside of him. In fact, he talks about himself as being so overwhelmingly filled with love that it's sometimes hard for him to find a place to put all that love. This is Peter Sandhill's image of himself. That's not the Peter Sandhill I'm experiencing. I'm experiencing a Peter Sandhill who can't see anything, who will charge people before he has the skills to know if he's doing right, who doesn't ask, how am I doing, who blames every difficult feeling that comes up as a result of his behavior on his patient, who tells them constantly it's all about them, who laments, whines, and complains anytime he has any impact, and who feels vicious and hurt and betrayed when they tell anyone else what his impact is, as opposed to, I am so sorry, what can I do about it? That's an adult. Peter Sandhill is not a therapist. He's not an adult. He is not a healthy human being in this domain. And I do not expect any of you, knowing Peter Sandhill, to say, oh, that's Peter, because I didn't see it. It took, and Peter is so pleasant and, and generous in one area. It's very easy to buy in with his constant assurances and skate. And then he runs around so quickly, it's very hard to pin him down. That's, I think, one of the biggest defenses of all, rushing around in all these relationships, rushing around in all these countries, doing this. He packs his therapy sessions so quickly, that there's often, he's either late or he's within minutes of ending and he goes right in. It's an addictive rushing around dynamic to make sure he doesn't see anything and no one else can see him. This is addiction. It's not healthy therapist. It's not healthy therapy. And I care about him. Remember, I fell in love with him more than I ever fell in love with anyone. And I remember that. This is not good for him. I'm not saying send him off into a prison brig in solitary confinement. I'm saying the amount of grief he's going to have to deal with when he understands his impact, when he gets down from that addictive high, is so deep. It's a tragedy, considering what he set out to do. He needs help, not more patience to abuse. Help. And that is what I asked the facilitators to do, help him. They didn't. They enabled the abuse. Peter went right back into the abuse cycle after meeting the facilitators. He had a moment when he was losing his job, and he thought he was, and he called me and said, I'm it's really worried the board has got involved. I may lose my job around this. I said, Peter, I didn't ask them to fire you. I asked them to help you. And he said, well, the board, blah, 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 blah. He said, I could lose my job. And I said, oh my gosh. And I'm having to carry Peter's worry before getting a single bit of help because he is worried. He is obsessed with himself. And I made an email to the facilitators, don't fire Peter. I think Peter's going to learn about this. And as soon as he got his breather, he abandoned me. He's right back into this isn't my stuff. Why do I have to take all this time? Oh gosh, it's a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And I do not want a single therapeutic patient going through that kind of bullshit with Peter Sandhill ever again. When someone doesn't make a stand for you, I asked him to find me a trauma therapist. He would tell me about how he was enjoying team workshop, how Peter Rengel was helping him, how he was getting enough sex, how his energy worked. He would tell me about all the support he was getting for himself. He did not once offer to get me any support. So I asked him, I said, Peter, how about giving me some support? I'm falling apart here. He had to think about it for several days. And I had to remind him, as usual, this is the nagging of Peter Sandhill, in the constant shame. You're not worth it. You're not worth it. You're not worth it. Your feelings don't matter. Your feelings don't matter. Mine matter, of course, but yours don't matter. So I had to remind him. I said, okay, I'll buy you 8 sessions. The magnanimous Peter. I said, fine. Let's have it. They never showed up. He said, well, I tried this person. They're not really available, blah, blah, blah. He was able to marshal amazing support for himself, but not for me. This is cowardice. It is shame. It is the deepest message of betrayal. You don't matter as a lover. You don't matter as a student. You don't matter as a participant. You don't matter at all. And, well, the fact that you fell in love with me on my overdose and all that, and I did it, well, I kind of understand, but, let's move on. I'm ready to move on, says Peter Sandhill. So he does. This is shame. And it's not service. It is enraging. So I'm carrying all of this. And I don't know how. I can't go to another therapist after 4 of my therapists have betrayed me and deal with the feelings of, is this one going to? Will this one take a stand? Will I have to pay this one another $100,000 before they say, oh no, I'm not going to do this for you. That's scary for me. Are they going to leave me in tears after the time is up? I can't deal with another betrayal like that. So I'm running and I'm fighting and I'm freezing and I'm addicting, doing the different traumatic coping things, and I'm reading and I'm learning. And I don't know if I will die, and I don't know if I will live. I don't know how many years will be taken off of my life, given that I started this with chronic fatigue. I don't know. The only thing that is absolutely clear to me is that I'm going to document the entire thing, because just as I don't think this is personal to me, in a culture this emotionally illiterate, I think a lot of people are dealing with worse. I don't feel special in the amount that I've been abused. As a highly sensitive person, I do not mean, by the way, everyone assumes immediately without reading the book that I think I'm more kind to other people. No. Sometimes the most sensitive people are the ones that say, get that away from me, when that noise comes out, and because it hurts their ears so much. They're not kind necessarily. They're reactive because their nervous system is more sensitive. So everything affects them 1 to 5 times more than anyone else. And nobody else gets it because we're an emotionally illiterate culture. And we don't even bother testing the biology or doing the HSP test, which takes all of 10 minutes, I might add. Please take it. This is what I'm carrying. And tonight, I raged at my partner in a way that I've never done before. Because I'm dealing with a grief that I don't know how to feel. I've been shamed for having feelings, particularly by my father. Nothing's worked to get through that. I can talk for 30 hours about this cerebrally. It doesn't help me weep. It's very, very hard. Because as soon as I go in there, I feel abandoned and lonely. As soon as I go in there, I feel helpless. I feel dark. And I asked Peter Sandhill, please come into this place with me and help me. And he said, no, I'm not going to. He said, I'm going to put some energy packets on the outside. I'm going to leave you in there alone. And anything else I can do, just call, He betrayed the request to be there for me. He was not willing to go into my dark place any more than he is with his own. And it is much harder going into this place of childhood pain and abandonment. After your community leaders, your facilitators have left you with all this and basically said, we don't care about how heavy this is. We don't even want to know. Just hold this, and if you collapse under the weight, that's life. We loved you the whole time. And I can't control any of this except one thing. I can record the entire process, because the most maddening betrayal of all is the willful negligence and the willful blindness every step of the way, the refusal to do what could be so easily done. Any one of the facilitators could have interrupted this traumatic cycle and made me feel significant and safe, calmed the adrenals down, and left me feeling that I was loved in a community that cared about me. And they did not. Because to make me feel safe would have involved owning the truth. Ever since my parents have lied to me and covered up their own shit at our expense, I have never felt safe when people are whitewashing what's going on. And every single facilitator in this community has felt the need to a wide range of degrees, to whitewash what's gone on, to deny what's going on, and have asked me to keep their secret to the extent of breaking their own guidelines. There is not a single high email list guideline that says if we abuse you, traumatize you, abandon you, and do illegal activity, and you want to ask for support in the community, you cannot do so because we will disconnect you from the lists all at once without a single word, so that you have another experience of betrayal when you reach out for a cuddle buddy and you get it loud and clear. We care more about ourselves than we care about you. Fuck off. Go deal with it. This is a grief that I do not know how to deal with. But going to battle, which is one of the traumatic responses, fighting, something I've never done, is one of the ways to reassure ourselves that's safe. And the biggest joke for me in this whole thing was that it was not until going through the entire protocol and exhausting every possible thing, and it is not until just recently sending Jason yet one more invitation to hire professional help, number one, have them review the 10-hour recording with Peter and the high response to it, and advise high on the ethical way to respond, and then for them to say what they will and will not do of those recommendations. I've made many recommendations that have just been stonewalled or flat out rejected. Amazing. It's like you can look at the Golden Path and all the, I've made numerous requests that are in High's interest, that are in High's participants' interest, that are in the board's interest, that are in the legal interest of High. They have been stonewalled, which means I may go to court, which astounds me. That would be the only way to teach leaders of love, intimacy, and sexuality how to treat a therapeutic patient with dignity. It's astounding. And that court is yet one more wave. In a traumatic situation, you don't like unknowns. You don't like things that are outside of your control. Court is an unknown. I've never had to deal with it in my entire life. It's out of my control. Now, trauma therapists assure me the court case is a slam dunk. But do you know how much sadness I have to deal with? To go from, these are my heroes, to, I'm dragging these people who are probably so ignorant and so abused themselves that, because you can't hurt someone and abuse them unless you've been abused in a similar way. It doesn't make sense. We treat people the way we are treating ourselves and the way we're treated, which is exactly why, having received this abuse from Peter Sandhill, I have traumatized other High participants and not realized it was wrong, because Peter told me what he was doing was loving, and it wasn't. It was trauma. So I've been too fast, too intense, too etc. And, it's your issue, just like Peter. When your dad's like that and your therapist's like that, it doesn't dissonate. When your government's like that, your dad's like that, your therapist's like that, it doesn't dissonate. So if anything, I've treated the people in relationship better than Peter has treated me, but it hasn't been optimal, and I feel sad about that. And I don't want these people teaching the next batch of people how to abuse one another and call it love. This is a lot, and if you've witnessed this, I thank you for carrying a little bit. Maybe you can understand 20% of this, maybe 50%, I don't know. But it is enormously suffocating to be all alone trying to figure out what to do with this. Well, my body's going this way and that way. Well, I'm terrified of this. Well, I spiral off into here. And realize that this is all fine as long as I don't bring it to light. As long as the secret is kept. I learned this with my parents. 3 of the 5 children are suicidal. It doesn't faze the parents. What phases them is some of their secrets coming to light. They will kill off right and left as long as they can do it with a blind eye. And this is not healthy. This is addiction. This is abuse. Thank you for watching.